Well, it's 12 o'clock, so we'll get started because we've only got an hour, and I imagine we're going to have quite a bit to chat through this morning. So welcome, good morning, good afternoon. It's fab to see so many of you joining us. My name's Sarah Davis. I'm Vice Chair of the North West branch of WISH, and we're here this afternoon to talk about all things building safety. Really pleased that we could be joined by our three panellists this afternoon. So we've got Lisa Leather, who is now Fire Safety Manager at Your Housing in the Northwest, previously Building Safety Manager at Trafford. We've got Liz Oliver, who's Safer Homes Director. Is that right, Liz? Yeah, at Hyde. So again, fabulous for you to join us. Are you the Inside Housing Building Safety Ambassador, I think, as well? So
I was,
fabulous.
yeah.
Fabulous that you could join us. Thanks, Liz. And finally, Siobhan Mccoy, who's the Head of Consultancy at Pennington Choices, who have very kindly sponsored this event this afternoon. And Siobhan's as well as being Head of Consultancy, she's Principal Consultant for all things building safety, so works with organisations up and down the country on property compliance and building safety issues. So we've got a fab panel today. The format, as always, really informal. Lisa, Liz and Siobhan are going to give us a kind of overview of building safety, an update on what they've been up to, lessons learned, but please do feel free to pop your hand up, or if you've got any questions, pop them in the chat and I'll keep my eye on the screen. It might be difficult because there's so many of us actually to notice all the hands. So if you have got a question or you want to dip in, just pop it in the chat and it's probably easier to follow it that way. So without further ado, we've not got too long, so I will pass over to Siobhan in the first instance, who's going to give us a bit of an overview and a presentation on the building safety journey to date, and sort of how we've got to where we are. So thanks, Siobhan.
Okay, afternoon everyone. So as Sarah said, I'm Siobhan Mccoy, I'm Head of Consultancy with Pennington Choices. I'm just going to talk to you this afternoon and give you a bit of an overview of building safety, just the background and the requirements. I appreciate lots of you on the call will be quite familiar with this stuff. There may well be others that are a bit less familiar with it. So I'm not going to talk for too long. I'm just going to give a very quick canter through what's led us to this point and what some of the key requirements are around the new regime. Just in terms of who we are, there's a slide in there. I'm not going to dwell on it. Lots of information on our website, but we do a lot of work around sort of property compliance generally, property safety, and increasingly these days around building safety and supporting organisations to prepare themselves for the new regime, and to implement the things that they really need to be thinking about now and on with preparing. In terms of how we've got here, just to know the background to where we're at, Grenfell really changed the world a number of years back, and it was the catalyst for a huge amount of reform over the last few years. And since then, the government's taken a number of steps to sort of strengthen sort of the wider construction industry's approach to building and fire safety, as well as the residential sector's approach as well. So that's culminated in a number of things, but just, one of the big things that they did immediately after the fire was they commissioned Dame Judith Hackett to carry out an independent review of both building regulations and fire safety. And she made her report, submitted her report in May 2018, which became known as Building a Safer Future, set out a wide variety of recommendations that, we're still in the process of implementing. Alongside that, there's been the Grenfell Tower public inquiry as well. That started a number of years ago. We've had the phase 1 inquiry, which looked at what happened on the night of the fire, and very much, the fire service response and what went wrong. And we've now got phase 2, which is underway. In fact, it's just concluded last week. So that's really looked at, it started off by looking at how the building was managed and the refurbishment work, but it's explored a whole host of other issues. It's also looked at the government's approach to sort of regulation, and it's concluded by hearing some evidence about what happened on the night in terms of the sort of the final hours of everyone who perished. So that's sort of the background to what's gone on over the last few years. The government, following the Building a Safer Future, they've set out their response, and then they've published another a set of additional key documents periodically since then. So again, I'm not going to go through all of those, but I suppose suppose the key ones to be aware of really are in July of last year, they introduced the Building Safety Bill to Parliament, and it received royal assent finally in April of this year. So that means that the Building Safety Act is now in place. It's now been enacted, and there are various parts of it that will start to take effect at various points over the next 18 months. Alongside all of this, as I mentioned, there has been the Grenfell Tower Phase 2 inquiry. And the reason that I mention that specifically is just because it's explored a number of issues that are very, very pertinent to, certainly if you're an organisation that owns buildings, higher risk buildings, but more generally, if you're an organisation that just manages assets generally. There are a lot of lessons in there for everyone to learn. So they looked in a lot of detail at, the whole process around the design and the installation of the refurbishment works and the installation of the cladding system, and came up with a number of themes across all of the areas that they've looked at. The sorts of things that got flushed out there were around, just dysfunction, incompetent, and an approach of putting cost and profit before managing safety. And really a lot of what, a lot of things that went wrong were around just because everyone had become so complacent about the degree of risk and the way in which it was managed. And unfortunately, it's gone badly wrong in the case of Grenfell. We've also, the inquiry also explored the role of Kensington and Chelsea TMO and the council in terms of their approach to building management and to how the refurbishment was managed. And again, lots of sort of messages there that are important for everyone who manages buildings to learn from. And that was around concern for residents, complaints and warning signs being dismissed from people who really knew what some of the risks and the issues were within the buildings they were living in. There were also wider sort of messages in terms of the competence of key people who were involved in that sort of the approach to keeping that building safe, specifically the fire risk assessor and the scope of the assessments that they did. And also it looked at issues and defects within the block and the quality of work by some of the contractors there. So you can see from sort of the recurring themes that have come up there, lots of issues that sort of impacted on how that building was managed on a day-to-day basis. And similar issues were found and stories that came out about how other buildings that were in the same sort of ownership and management also suffered from some of the same issues as well. So lots, again, as I say, for lessons for any organisation that owns and manages buildings. I mean, one of the things through all of this has been, the sector, generally, I think the housing sector has been seen as being more quick to respond to some of the issues that the inquiry has thrown up and to some of the change that's coming down the line with the whole building safety regime. But one of the messages that's been given consistently is that, once you know what's coming, it's important to just get on and prepare for it. So even though lots of parts of the Building Safety Act won't be implemented fully until next year, it's something that organisations should already be working on. And again, lots of organisations are, but others are still sort of working out exactly what they need to do and trying to work their way through a lot of that. But it's just to get that message out, if you are an organisation that knows that you're going to have duties and you're not quite sure what they are yet, it's really now is the time to be working on that. In terms of some of the key requirements of the Building Safety Act, the key things to sort of think about are that if you have an occupied building, in order for that to be within scope of the detailed requirements, the specific obligations around those higher risk buildings, the building itself has to be at least 18 metres in height or at least 7 stories, and it must have 2 or more residential units. So that's for occupied buildings. There are also additional buildings that are brought within scope if they're during the design and construction phase, and there are requirements that apply across all higher risk buildings, even if they're not just residential units, but also if they contain hospitals and care homes when they're being designed and constructed. And if you have an occupied building, the key things that you must do are to take all reasonable steps to reduce your building safety risks against 2 sort of main risks. and that's to do with fire spread and structural failure. So keeping it safe from the risk that fire could spread throughout the building and impact on people's safety, and also that it is, structurally sound for a certain period, so that the fire can be fought and people rescued. In terms of some of the key requirements arising from the Building Safety Act, there are a lot of detailed requirements. The Act's a fairly hefty piece of legislation. There's been lots written about it, lots of guides published and so on. But some of the key requirements that have arisen from the Building Safety Act is that there is now a building safety regulator that's been established that is responsible for overseeing the regulatory regime. There are also duty holders and specific roles that have been established under the Building Safety Act. So if you have one of those occupied buildings that falls within scope, then your organisation, it's generally the organisation is the duty holder, but you will become an accountable person under the terms of the Act. And that places certain responsibility on you. There was initially, I've greyed out and put it in italics there, mention of a building safety manager. When the bill was first published, there was to be an additional duty holder, that of building safety managers, who would support the accountable person and undertake certain prescribed functions. The government, as the bill was making its way through Parliament, they removed the specific requirement to appoint a building safety manager. But ultimately, all of the duties that applied to the accountable person and the building safety manager now sit with the accountable person. And it's for that person, someone acting on behalf of the organisation, to make sure that all of the specific requirements around the Act itself are implemented. In terms of buildings, in design and construction, there have been 3 construction gateways implemented. So construction gateways 1, 2 and 3. Construction gateway 1 came into place last year, and the others are being brought into force. And then the remainder of those bullet points down the screen relate to buildings that are occupied. So as before a new building can be occupied, it must be registered with the building safety regulator, and it must receive a building assessment certificate. And for existing buildings, the regulator will invite organisations to register the buildings. That will happen next year. There'll be a 6-month period in which organisations will be invited to register their buildings with the regulator, and then they will be invited to submit applications for building assessment certificates, and the building safety regulator will then assess that and determine whether or not they are going to issue those assessment certificates. And what they'll do in considering that is to determine whether or not they think the building is safe and is being managed safely. The accountable person also has to undertake regular assessments of the risks for each of the buildings that they own, and take steps to control those key risks. And they must then prepare a safety case and a safety case report that sets out what the risks are and demonstrate that they are managing those, and how they're going to keep the building safe. They'll also have to work to a mandatory occurrence reporting regime, which is basically if there are significant safety risks, then they will have to report those to the regulator. They'll also have to hold digital building information known as the golden thread, and hold that electronically, digitally, and that will form part of the safety case reports, safety case as well. But that will basically cover key information that is held to enable you to understand how your building is constructed and built, and to be able to use that to keep the building safe during future refurbishment works, construction and management and so on. And accountable persons will also have to produce a resident engagement strategy, which says how they're going to engage with residents, and work with them to make sure that they can help them to manage safety within the building as well. There have been a number of draft regulations laid under the Act. You'll be able to pick up these slides afterwards. I'm not going to go through those, but there's sort of supporting pieces of legislation that will will provide more detail to support the high-level information within the Building Safety Act. And those specific regulations will be able to be quickly changed as the need arises moving forward. So there's going to be an awful lot to read and get heads around over the coming 12 months. Also, a number of additional pieces of legislation that have been brought out as part of the overall building safety regime as well. So some changes to the Fire Safety Order. The Fire Safety Act has now come into force. That was introduced last year. It's come into force earlier this year. And then the Fire Safety England regulations have been laid, which will come into effect next year. So that will implement lots of the requirements and recommendations from the Phase 1 Grenfell Tower inquiry. We've also had the Social Housing Regulation Bill as well, which is, whilst it's looking at how social landlords are regulated, there are things in there specifically to support landlords in their duties to keep residents safe. And one of the key things is that landlords are going to be required to identify a senior named person who will be responsible for complying with all of the health and safety requirements that exist or that apply to that organisation. And lastly, I just wanted to put this slide up, you know, that lots and lots of fires. The last two on there are actually fires that happened last week. So the third box from the right is a fire. There were lots of fires across the country last week. And I think it's something that I wanted to just flag up, because it's really making it sort of crystallising some of the additional risks associated with buildings, I suppose, and that it's not just about the building itself, it's about the activities and the behaviours of people who live in buildings, but also of what can happen outside the building. So the third one was a fire last week in London, and it's the fire, I think it was on the top floor of the building, but it was a heavily cluttered flat, which hindered the response that was able to be made to that particular fire. It was one where there were no, you know, certainly no fatalities as a result of it. But nonetheless, it just sort of illustrates the particular risks there. And the one on the right is a fire that actually started outside the block. It was in Bethnal Green last week. The block has dangerous cladding and it's subject to a wake-in watch. And the fire itself didn't start within the building. It's believed to have started after a cigarette was thrown into some bushes adjacent to it on a day when the temperature was around about 40 degrees in London. So the block itself, the building itself, didn't catch alight, but there was smoke billowing up the side of the buildings, and the flames were right beside some of the flammable cladding. So there were obvious risks there as well. So, you know, it's just to sort of flag up that building safety isn't just about what happens within the building, it's a much broader things. So I'm conscious of time. I'm going to stop my bit now, and I'm going to hand over to Lisa, who's going to talk about, well, okay, those are all the requirements, but what does it actually mean on a day-to-day basis? How do organisations need to respond? So over to you, Lisa.
Thanks, Siobhan. Great, thank you. So as mentioned, my name's Lisa Leather. I'm the Fire Safety Manager at Your Housing Group. So I know I was originally booked as a building safety manager, but there is a lot of similarities between a fire safety manager and a building safety manager. They're both about keeping our buildings safe, keeping our residents safe, and resident engagement's a key part of both roles. So hopefully you still find the content relevant. To touch on building safety, what I'll do is I'll talk a little bit about our fire safety team and building safety team, and sort of objectives and our priorities for both of those. So a bit of context, Your Housing Group, we've got 29,000 homes across 53 local authorities, all based within the northwest of England. We've got 728 buildings that fall under the Fire Safety Order, 12 towers, 17 extra care and 64 sheltered housing schemes, 93 supported units. So some of those are managed by Your Housing Group directly, some by a managing agent, and the rest of the stock is a mixture of low and mid-rise blocks, commercial units and offices. We've got quite a few complex mixed-use buildings where we've got PFI agreements with shared responsibilities. So main difference there is I've swapped being responsible for around 12 towers for being responsible for 728 buildings. So I've probably got a bit of a raw deal there. So this is what our fire and building safety team structures look like. They both sit under the same director, which is important. So they both sit under our director of building and asset management. My role there as fire safety manager, I have line management responsibilities for our compliance contract manager, who manages around 5 fire stopping contracts. So that's mainly managing compartmentation works, fire door upgrades, and also manages where we need fire alarm upgrades. We've got our 2 compliance surveyors. That's a really key role. So when a fire risk assessment comes in, if we need a bit more information, if we need somebody in-house to go and have a look at the action before we allocate it to a contractor, they go off and do that for us. And they also do in-works and post-works inspections for us. So that's really key for auditing and quality control. And then our fire actions program manager, this is quite a new post, but it's already had a massive impact in the number of out of policy FRA actions we've got. So our fire actions manager, she basically hounds the other teams, or supports is a nicer word, departments across the business to help them with progressing any actions that they might be struggling with or need a bit more support on. And then our fire risk coordinator offers admin support to the team. And then over on our building safety team, we have a head of building safety, a newly appointed building safety manager, Ruth, and they are supported by their building safety coordinator. So in terms of fire safety manager or a building safety manager, both roles are very much about reacting to risks that you've got on site. Obviously, we do manage maintenance and inspections and works, but it is about spending your time where it's needed. You need to be good at basically, you need to be good at juggling, you need to be good at time management, and you just need to be good at prioritising to make sure you're always addressing what the most important issue is that day. My main kind of role really is to act as a subject matter expert on fire safety for all staff that might need advice or support. I very much have an open door policy. Anyone can come to me at any time with any questions or queries on fire safety. And that mainly means working with like our housing team, our older person services team, the supported team. We very much have strict targets on being compliant on our FRA programme. So we need to have 100% of our sites with a valid in-date fire risk assessment at all times, and we do have targets on reducing our out of policy fire risk actions. So we're reviewing those actions, we're chasing up contractors at least on a weekly basis to make sure that we're always addressing those as quickly as we can. Obviously the role is very much about building positive relationships with the fire service. And I kind of get involved by coordinating the primary authority partnership, because we're spread over a few local authorities. Our primary authority advises through Greater Manchester, so they'll help input into policies, they'll help if we've got any buildings where we've got concerns about, and just generally give us advice on making sure we're compliant with legislation. So I've just kind of put both teams side by side there, just to sort of compare that although there are quite different objectives, one's, you know, about the Fire Safety Order and what will be the Fire Safety Act, and then on the other side we've got the Building Safety Act, but they very much complement each other. It is about completing inspections, it's about completing remedial works, again working with the fire service and just making sure that we're compliant with legislation at all times. And again, just a bit of a visual representation of how that kind of works and how both teams, by addressing their objectives, put resident safety at the heart of everything we do. So we can see there at the centre of everything that the fire safety team does, at the centre of everything the building safety team does, we've got residents in the middle. So obviously to have effective procedures, policies in place for fire or building safety, you know, you've kind of got to get that message from the top down. So what your housing group have done is they've made resident safety its #1 priority as part of a business plan. And that's very much cascaded down to other teams, and it has really created like a can-do attitude for fire safety across the group. We have rewritten our fire safety policy, and that included input from our colleagues, our customers, and our Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue, the primary authority as well. And we're currently looking at all the procedures that sit underneath that policy. So for example, our PCFRA procedure, our person-centred risk assessment procedure. By setting up the structure of the fire safety team the way we have with that role for FRA actions, it has helped us really drive down the number of out of policy actions that we've got. So we've gone down from having around 400 out of policy actions, and our target is to be at 100 by April next year. And again, that involves cooperation and working together with all the other teams across the business. We're very open and transparent with how we report a progress, for example, on FRA actions as well. That goes to our customer committee. So again, it gives them the opportunity to scrutinise performance and how we're managing fire risk at their buildings, which is really important. And we've also created our building safety team. So the building safety team are very much going to be responsible for things like external wall surveys and preparing for new legislation like the Building Safety Bill. What we have done is we've also set up a building and fire safety core group. So that has attendance from key internal stakeholders. So not just the fire safety and building safety team, but housing teams, developer teams, older people services, and our fire risk assessor and the fire service also come to those meetings as well. So at the meeting, we review any changes in legislation. So as Siobhan's covered, all the new legislation that's coming up, we discuss how we're preparing for that, what that means we need to do. We review any fire incidents or any false alarms. We review performance on the fire risk assessment programme, and that group also sign off and approve any relative policies or procedures. We've invested heavily in staff learning and development. So I'm at the moment reviewing our in-house fire safety training packages to make sure that they're suitable and also like role specific as well, which is really important. We have 2 members of the building safety team currently completing the CIOB level 6 building safety manager training. That's a course that I did earlier in the year, and that's a really great course for, as Siobhan's covered, making sure you've got that level of competency in-house to manage fire and building risk. So a little bit about the work we've done today. We've spent 6.5 million on fire safety works over the last 12 months alone. And we've also got a budget of £20 million to be invested over the next 4 years. And the majority of that is compartmentation works, including compartmentation to roof voids, upgrading fire doors and upgrading on fire alarm systems to make sure that they're suitable for the building and the client group. We've engaged with our fire engineers, Hydrock, and the fire service to ensure the suitability of evacuation plans in our sheltered and extra care schemes are suitable. We have 8 major fire safety works projects that have either just been completed or are ongoing. And the building safety team have instructed 8 external wall system surveys at our high rises, and there's a further 4 planned this year. And we've introduced a compliance facilities agents role. So they're staff that are there just to complete compliance checks at our buildings. So rather than calling it a block check, we call it a compliance check to make sure that the focus is checking the fire alarms, checking the fire doors are closing, AOVs, that kind of thing. We've also invested in a fire door management solution with Microsoft C365. So that's basically about how we're going to record and manage fire door inspections when that goes live in January next year as part of the Fire Safety Act. And we've just engaged with a company called Oakliffe, who are doing some sample surveys of our fire doors, just to give us an idea of what kind of condition they're in and maybe which blocks we need to prioritise for any kind of upgrades. Resident engagement, we've launched a Your Voice on Customer Safety strategy, which is very much about how do we enable customers to have a say in how fire safety is managed at their building, how do we enable them to scrutinise us and raise complaints and challenges. So the image to the right, that's our fire emergency plan. So we've issued our customers with a copy of their evacuation plan for their building along with this form, and we've asked them to either fill it out and post it back, or we've asked them to go online and fill it out on our website. And it's just sort of like to confirm that residents have an understanding of the fire evacuation plan, but it's also to give them an opportunity if they want to ask for more information or if they want to raise any concerns about their ability to self-evacuate in the event of a fire. We've established a high-rise forum. There's only been 1 meeting so far, COVID, but it went really well. As you can see there, we got quite a good attendance, and our high-rise residents came down again, told us what they wanted out of the forum, and told us that, give them an opportunity to set the agenda. We've got 6 high-rise resident groups, so our high-rise customers, they are already quite vocal and engaged, so we very much want to use those existing groups to help input into our service. And we have our customer services committee and our customer scrutiny panel, and as I said, they input into fire and building safety policies. So next steps, I'm currently developing a fire risk management plan with a clear strategy for fire risk management. So the idea is that will sit under our fire safety policy and add a bit more meat to the bones on how we're really going to make fire safety our number 1 goal. And then the idea is that we'll have linked procedures that will sit off that, for example, a PCFRA procedure. Once the building safety team have completed their external wall system surveys, they're then going to agree a 3-year programme of works. and they're going to prioritise any remediation works based on the risk on that site. There is a matrix for that that I think was launched by the government, so we've kind of based our risk scoring on that tool. And obviously, big focus, continue to maintain compliance with legislation, which sounds quite simple, but given that legislation is shifting and changing every day, it takes more work. It takes a lot more work now. So as part of that, as I said, we're going to review any changes to legislation as a group regularly, and we're also focusing on compliance with British standards to make sure we're looking at best practice rather than like the minimum requirements. And as I said, very much a focus on fire risk actions. If we're reducing fire risk actions at our buildings, we're making our buildings safer. So as I said, the target is to be under 100 on those by the end of April. And again, continue to focus on contractor management and control of works on site. We've just launched some new contractor KPIs around not just making sure that they attend appointments on time and do the works on time, it's also KPIs around making sure they're evidencing the competency, they're sending their accreditations, they're sending evidence of the engineer's qualifications. So it's very much about verifying contractors as well as just making sure they are where they say they are. And I'm personally going to be re-procuring our fire risk assessment contract by April next year. As Siobhan covered, there's a big focus on making sure your fire risk assessor is competent. You need to have absolute confidence in your fire risk assessor, and again, making sure they've got the right experience of doing FRAs at tower blocks, making sure that they've got the right accreditations with the Fire Engineers Council, that sort of thing. And we will be introducing a fire door inspection policy and procedure and fire door inspection form by January. And again, to look at in-house competency, our maintenance repairs team, 360 team, they'll be enrolling some of our joiners on BM Trada training to improve their competency in completing fire door repairs. ICT system software, it's a big part of building safety and fire safety. We talk a lot about making sure we're doing inspections, making sure we're managing risk, but actually, having the right systems in place is so key to that. So we're looking to introduce a new system for how we manage fire risk actions. Obviously, we've already talked about the fire door inspection system, so we want to launch something similar for our fire safety inspections and our site compliance forms. And then last but not least, we want to continue to improve on resident engagement, continue to promote awareness and understanding of resident evacuation plans and the importance of fire doors and fire door closers. The two of those are obviously two requirements that have been listed as essential for all fire safety order buildings under the new Fire Safety Act. So it's the right thing to do, but it is also part of legislation. And we're going to be digitalising completion of our PCFRA forms. We want to implement customer-friendly FRAs, so we can just give the customers a summary of the key information they need from those, and just generally continue to involve customers through our customer groups and high-rise living forum.
I mean, there's so much in there, Lisa, wasn't there? I know I've got a load of questions to kind of that I was jotting down as we were talking. So perhaps, Liz, if we go over to you now, you can give us an overview of sort of what you've been up to at Hyde. And then, as I say, if anyone's got any questions or thoughts as everyone's chatting, just pop them in the chat box and we'll have some time at the end to go through them. Thanks, Liz.
Thanks, Sarah. Good afternoon, everybody. And I feel bad that I don't have a presentation, so you're just going to have to look at this like ugly mug for a while. So yeah, I'm the Safer Homes Director at Hyde Housing, and I look after not only the fire safety and delivery side of things. We've just set up a new building safety team, but also look after the general compliance, so gas, electric, all that joy. And I've also set up a assurance function, so just to have another additional line of assurance that we can track. So we kind of are predominantly based in London, down into Brighton, over into Kent, and we've got some properties up in Peterborough. We currently have 81 tall towers. So that's kind of 11 metres and above, and we have 263 11 to 18 metre buildings. So hence why I just don't get my hair dyed anymore. I just keep it grey because it's just better that way. But actually, Hyde is just an amazing organisation to work for, and I'm so very proud to be part of it. So we've always had a very proactive approach to our kind of fire and building safety. and it is, like every other organisation, paramount to us. We have that centralised fire safety and delivery team that manages all aspects of FRAs, actions, and the major kind of remediation works. We have to ensure, and one of the kind of the big words that kind of does go around in fire safety is proportionate. So we really make sure that we try and take that proportionate approach to resident and building safety. So to date, we have conducted extensive fire remediation works to over about 40 buildings within our portfolio. And we currently have 11 major fire projects in train, and that covers about 46 individual blocks. And we've currently applied for around £27 million worth of funding from the Building Safety Fund. So this means we've kind of spent around £83 million to carry out various amounts of fire safety works. And we have been very public in the legal action that we've been taking against developers. And I'm sure if people are kind of looking at kind of the building safety press, you'll have seen that we've recently won quite a big case for against a developer down in Gosport. Now, although the kind of the outcome says it's very much related to Gosport, we do think that this could have a big impact on the wider sector moving forward. We've still not, the judgments came out, but we've still not been told how much like will be kind of reimbursed, but more than happy to kind of keep people up to date on that. That case aside, we've also recovered about £15 million as well from other developers, and we do continually pursue our developers and contractors on kind of doing the right thing. As Lisa said, our customers are at the heart of everything that we do, and during the number of projects that we've undertaken, we have learned many lessons, and we've also learned that it's a huge changing landscape. So you'll kind of think you'll go in with a plan of how you want to undertake the works, and then you'll have a kind of announcement saying, you know, set as kind of set product is now not allowed to be used. We've also seen that it takes a really long time when you're negotiating with developers to do the right thing. And we've got 2 active cases at the moment, and we're probably about 2 years in, hoping to be on site for one of them probably by the end of September. But we've had to have our own solicitors, they've had their solicitors, we've had fire experts, which are really hard to kind of track down. And there's been a lot of kind of going back and forward in terms of the remediation plans. We always want to ensure that we're gaining the best outcome for our customers, and we completely understand and share the frustrations that our customers are going through in terms of the length of time that it's taking, and actually for them to move on with their life. I'm also involved with reviewing the approach of fire safety in line with government guidance, and I've recently just stepped down as chair of the G15 Building Safety Group, which is a really kind of great opportunity to kind of look at how we are delivering fire safety within the kind of the G15, which is a kind of the biggest. They say 15, but it's not 15 anymore, of the housing associations in the country. And as I mentioned, in addition to our fire safety delivery team, we've recently created a building safety team. So I've got a head of building safety, we've got a couple of building safety managers, and I've also got a building safety records officer. So that's somebody that's starting to pull together all the relevant documentation, as well as another individual who is pulling together all the kind of the data points for the building safety case files. Sorry, excuse me. So we currently started with about 400 data points that we felt that we needed to use to create our building safety case. We've managed to reduce that to about 250, and we think we're probably there or thereabout So this team has been created with the aim of providing a holistic approach to building safety. Once we kind of adopt that process for all of the blocks over 18 metres, we'll start kind of doing a mirrored solution to the blocks that are under 11 metres. So we've kind of produced a risk prioritisation tool, and we've set up various internal and external working groups. So we've got an external customer fire safety panel that works with us, and that's from customers and not just leaseholders, but throughout all of our blocks, that we ask them to review what we're doing and the scope. We also liaise with our customer voice team to ensure that we're kind of getting that terminology right as well. So in terms of our building safety case file, the first one that we've done took around 50 man hours to kind of complete. So that's quite hefty. But as we can go through, we're managing to reduce that, and we're hoping to get a really good technological solution to assist us with that. We have delivered multiple training and bite-sized sessions to all teams across our organisation, and we want to ensure that we keep building safety at the heart of every conversation within Hyde. So any member of staff, any contractor that is attending site on Hyde's behalf, they have an obligation to feedback on any kind of issue that they may see, and we're starting to get that position working really well. And we're implementing a new system called Total Mobile to not only work with the responsive repairs element, but picking up all of my Safer Homes functions. We have recently appointed Hydrock to undertake our EWS programme. So they'll undertake the external wall inspections, they'll undertake the PAS 9980 inspections, and then at the end of that, and if any remediation needs to be done, they will complete and provide us with an EWS1 form. So I've just given a bit of a whistle-stop tour there of what we do. I think for me that the biggest lesson is things don't happen quickly when it comes to fire safety and building safety. Be open and honest and transparent with the customers. So I've always said that I cannot give you a definitive timescale on when we're going to manage to get works done, get updates provided. And it's just allowing and keeping transparent information. So, you know, when Lisa was talking about fire actions and the risk assessments, we've managed to now, from the beginning of the year, have no overdue fire risk assessment actions, which is a mighty task. And it's all about working as not just a fire safety team, but as working as Hyde and as kind of collaborating with everybody else. It has certainly been a journey. There is things that I look back on and think, oh, maybe we should have done it that way, but hindsight is a wonderful thing, not only in life, but definitely when it comes to building safety. And actually, our customers are now seeing the benefits and what we are doing and coming along with us in that journey. So although at times you may feel that you're pushing water uphill using a rake, you will get there, and just go with it. And if anybody wants to kind of reach out, I'm always here. I've kind of got the blood, sweat and tears and working in housing. You know, let's not try and reinvent the wheel, let's work collaboratively together. Particularly for those the smaller housing associations. And that's me. I hope everybody found that really useful. And I think we're going to questions now, Sarah.
That's absolutely, fantastic. Thanks so much, Liz. I know we're sort of running short of time, but I think we could probably spend a whole afternoon here. We've had one question through already from Annabelle, who said, great presentations. To be interested to know if you've made any changes to how you assess new development opportunities and or how you manage development projects on site. Liz, can you go first?
Yeah, of course. So yes, we have. So we have a working team that works through my team and development. And we've got a new home standard, so everything that we want to do and we've started kind of trialing through all the gateway processes. But yeah, it's always looking at the kind of the land and acquisition from that very beginning, and it's looking at when you're starting to put products, we take photographs, we're QR coding everything, we're keeping a huge inventory of what's going in there, because what we've really struggled on is historic records from kind of our existing stock.
Thanks, Liz. Lisa, how about you?
Yeah, similar. You know, your housing, our building safety team, fire safety team, we link up with our developer team on not just new builds but major refurbs as well, and just sort of support them where they might need a bit of advice on how to challenge contractors, and you know, get a bit of advice on following the gateway procedure. And as Liz said, getting the information from handover, it's still an issue, and even though it's part of the gateway process now, it's still an issue making sure you get that data in a meaningful way. So it's just working on making sure that comes through. And to be honest, it was a similar situation at Trafford. You know, you can't beat just going out and having a look at these sites before, say, they've put the ceilings in, before they've put the compartmentation in. So I would just suggest linking up with site visits as well.
Great, thanks. Hope that answered your question, Annabelle. Thank you. Tammy,
thank you.
Asked, great stuff. What IT systems are you using or looking to use for managing the golden thread?
Yeah, so we are looking at C365. So we're looking at C365 because very much you can sort of build that system to have the scheduling tools, the document management tools, and then obviously reviewing how far we go with existing asset management systems like Keystone. But we're very much about trying to get a company in that'll build something for us.
Great, Liz.
Yeah, and we're just transitioning. So we've got Keystone, we're transitioning out of that into a product called Total Mobile. And we also use our Power BI analytics team to develop that.
Great stuff, thank you. We've got another question from Diane. You mentioned, it's for Lisa, this question. You mentioned in your presentation that evacuation plans for sheltered and extra care is a piece of work you've completed. Are you able to share more on what you might have implemented or changed as a result?
Yeah, so basically we've kind of started with the fire risk assessment. So where that's highlighted that maybe the fire alarm isn't suitable for the building, or it's highlighted compartmentation concerns with the stay put policy, we've then reviewed whether we need to have either a part simultaneous evacuation plan, or we've got some phased evacuation plans as well. So we've engaged Hydrock, who Liz mentioned, to do some fire engineering advice for us and input into what would be the most suitable evacuation plan based on the building as it is. And then we're working with our fire alarm contractor, ABCA, to complete whatever upgrades that we need to complete. Once the compartmentation works have been done, the fire alarm engineers then come in and configure the alarm so it either supports the stay put policy if that's what we want. But a lot of that is obviously about communication with residents. So we've kind of got a step guide when we're looking at evacuation plans, and particularly if we're changing an evacuation plan, you know, we've got the sort of comms good to go really to sort of issue in a customer friendly way what the evacuation plan is. Again, you need to complete the PCFRA, particularly if you move into a phased evacuation or simultaneous evacuation. You might need to look at obviously implementing a wake-in watch at those buildings. You know, we have got wake-in watch at a couple of our extra care schemes, because it isn't just tower blocks where there might be issues with the building. So yeah, it is a big piece of work, and but hopefully we're working towards getting these buildings back to stay put if we can.
Thanks, Lisa. Louise has asked a question. I think this is a really important point, but have you had any struggles with getting the board to see building and fire safety as #1 priority? And if so, how have you got past this? Should we go to Liz first?
I've got to say we've been really lucky with the board. We've taken the board on the journey. So we've kind of given them the training, we've provided them with kind of industry guidance, but we've also kind of given them our plans of what we're doing. And it's one of our corporate objectives is to have safe, decent homes for everyone. So it's part of our kind of corporate plan.
Absolutely, it needs to be front and centre, doesn't it? Lisa, similar story for you?
Yeah, similar story. I think I mentioned in my presentation, your housing group, it has made resident safety like the #1 priority in the corporate plan. So they'll tend to have 4 key themes, and that's been made #1. And I think it, you know, it is important because it's very easy for boards and companies to say resident safety is our #1 priority, but you kind of have to back that up by making sure you've got the right people involved, you know, enough budgets. You know, there's a talk about how much money they've spent. You need to have the budgets and the staff in place to back that up. So that's really important as well.
Thanks, Lisa. And Siobhan, your sort of broader experience from across the sector?
Yeah, I think this is a really good question, actually, and I think very timely as well, because I was delivering a session last week. I deliver a couple of slots on the CIOB Level 6 diploma to the Building Safety Manager course. And it was a point that came up last week with some of the delegates who were on the session, talking about some of the challenges they've got internally in terms of getting some of the risks to some of their buildings recognised at a senior level. So we had quite a bit of discussion around how to raise that within organisations. So I know really refreshing to hear sort of, you know, Hyde and your housing's experience there, and the you know, certainly that, you know, the embracing of that and taking the board on a journey. But I think for some organisations it is much more of a challenge, and I think there are things, you know, certainly the things that Liz and Lisa have mentioned there are really good to think about. And it may, some of what we spoke about last week was getting together more of a strategic and operational risk register around some of the building safety risks that may exist within organisations, and using that as a tool to enable people to see some of the risks that may exist when it's not being recognised, and linking in with sort of, you know, corporate assurance and governance to make sure that that is recognised and forms part of the governance oversight within the organisation can be really important as well.
Absolutely. And Christine's just made a comment here in, that pre-Grenfell, would it have been as easy to take the board on with you? And probably not is the answer, maybe, isn't it? But again, Liz, Lisa, any observations on that?
I think kind of a few of the organisations I've kind of worked in since kind of pre-Grenfell, I suppose it was very gas heavy.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of changed, but the whole perspective now, I think now has changed. I think it depended on who was in the board and the kind of the metrics that you were using and what information that you were providing. There was always something kind of, especially for me, overseeing all of the kind of compliance functions that we had to report into board, and they were into any kind of the boards that I've kind of in the organisations that I've worked in, and always kind of scrutinising our kind of our policy procedures and our group audit committee. I was always kind of heavily, and still continue to be kind of heavily audited in my function.
Fabulous. And I mean, I think it's fair to say we talk a lot about how to kind of communicate and engage with residents, don't we, and how to kind of simplify what's a really technical, ever-changing landscape, lots of legislation, lots of, you know, technical jargon, but actually just simplifying it for the rest of the organisation is really important too, isn't it? And for exec boards, you know, other areas of the organisation who aren't involved, I think that's absolutely key, isn't it, in terms of people actually understanding the risk. So, question from Louise, what have you come across in your reviews, fire safety, building safety journey that you found the most shocking? So non-compliances, issues that have been hard to overcome, so the rest of us can look out for it. Lisa, anything from you?
I don't know so much about shocking, but I think it is just instilling that message that fire safety is a group-wide thing. I think not so much at your housing, but in previous roles, you know, we've kind of encountered like housing teams that don't necessarily see fire safety as part of their role, and I think, you know, it's very easy to just not make a judgment, but you've got to work with people. Like you said, it's not just about communicating with your residents, communicating with your staff. So, you know, engaging more with staff, doing some role specific training, getting the videos up, getting the photos up, sort of showing people what the consequences are if you just sort of turn a blind eye. I think for me, things like people walking past a fire door that doesn't fully fit into its frame, but not logging that as a repair. So it is very much about that kind of don't walk by policy. So I won't say there's anything particularly shocking, but just lots of little bits that if you work on them, you just get that holistic, you know, building safety approach.
There's a real culture change piece, isn't it, that needs to come?
Yeah, culture change. Yeah.
So Liz, how about you?
I think for me is when we've done the kind of the intrusive surveys of the buildings, it's the lack of fire breaks and the cavity barriers and where they're supposed to be, and that's even in some fairly recent buildings. So it is ensuring, kind of going back to one of my last points, is when you're starting to go through that development process, you have to make sure that you're getting it signed off at every stage and just getting evidence as much as you can.
Yeah, thank you. And Siobhan, a final comment from you, conscious we've got 3 minutes left.
No, that's fine. I mean, obviously we do a lot of work with organisations who are very much in the thick of, you know, are they even fit for today, never mind what's coming down the line. So we see lots of issues in terms of sort of oversight, assurance, in terms of sort of governance and leadership and culture, really, but also some, you know, people struggling with the tools that they need to be able to do their job effectively. So we see lots of gaps around data management, around policies, procedures, which give clarity to people. I suppose if you're thinking about, you know, what are some of the things that you need to look out for and be aware of from a building safety perspective, I would recommend that people go back and have a look and read through. There's podcasts available, and Inside Housing did some really good summaries every week. Just some of the some of the stuff that's come out of the Grenfell Tower inquiry, particularly in the sessions when they were looking at building management, and about how the building was refurbished, but building management in particular, you know, things like, as Lisa and Liz have said, you know, people were walking past really poor quality works day in, day out. There wasn't respect for residents. There were lots of issues that were raised, and general competence of contractors as well. As well. So that makes for really good reading and a real list of what not to do if you wanted to have something succinct to go back and read up. That some of the particular weeks are worth reading.
Thank you. I really hope you've enjoyed the hour that we spent. There's absolutely tons there. I mean, I've got loads of questions for Liz and Lisa in particular. We could have talked for far longer. I really hope it was useful and that you've got what you needed out of it. If you want to get in touch with any of us, if you've got any more questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch, and we hope to see you again soon on another Wish event. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.